Hello. This is the Let Me Ask You This podcast, and I am your host, E.B. Hepworth, and you could be anywhere right now, but you are here listening to this podcast, and I want to let you know I do not take that lightly, and it means the world that you're here. This week on the podcast, we have a dear friend of mine, Lauren Numedal, and we are going to talk about singleness. Singleness is one of those things you just tread lightly because there are so many thoughts, there's so much gray, there's just, but talking about singleness as a woman in her 30s and just running after sold out for the gospel, there's so much to be learned from this conversation and from this woman. And so I just thought, you know what? I'm going to bring a woman that's living it, she is in it. I want to bring her to the table and I want her to share insight. Maybe lessons she's learned, maybe ways she hasn't done things, the best. Like there is so much to be learned from this woman and from this conversation. And so I know you're going to love it. You are probably going to laugh at so many different parts of this conversation. When Lauren and I get together, we get into our goofy girl laugh. So with that being said, lean in. If you find yourself in the car or maybe a long walk in the hills or wherever, lean into this conversation, and I hope that it speaks to you in a timely way. Thanks so much. Does this feel weird? The sound waves are so loud. Okay, this is my amazing friend, Lauren Numedal. And like I said in her intro, Lauren just carries such a genuine heart for Jesus and her heart of tenderness. She is the most tender woman I know. And she's usually my friend that will cry with me. If someone's crying, she's crying with them. She's such a gift to be able to co-suffer with people. And we're talking about middle-aged singleness. We're laughing because we don't feel like it's middle-aged. We feel like she's 30. So I feel like 30 is still young adult, but somebody on Instagram said that it's middle-aged. So
we'll take it. I'm middle-aged.
So Lauren, do you want to introduce yourself in a little, for somebody who doesn't know you?
Yeah. So yes, like Eve said, I am 30. I am a hospice nurse by day. So that's fun when you cry all the time.
Yes.
But no, I love my job. And yeah, have a dog, love the outdoors, have one sister here in town. And it's just the two of us, and yeah, life is good in Boise, Idaho.
It's amazing. So little backdrop is Lauren and I, our friendship started in the Philippines. We went on a mission trip and we basically fell in love with each other. And we just laugh over, when we're together, we just laugh over everything. I said that in the intro. You didn't hear that, but I'm like, gosh, we just it's hilarious when we get together. So that's your warning.
Watch out.
Yeah. You have the dream of companionship.
Yeah.
You deeply desire to be in a relationship. Some people are like, I'm single and I know it and I love it in the season or whatever. But most of your adult life, or even teens, just as you've grown up, you have desired to be married, correct?
Correct. I think like all things in seasons of waiting, there's days where you feel incredibly encouraged and seen. And then there's days that feel incredibly lonely. And I think that's the challenge, even in the last 4 or 5 months for me, is really fixing perspective. And it's like, whoa, my perspective on this truly shifts everything about how I feel about it. And really some days fighting for gratitude and feeling like, grasping for what I can feel thankful for in this season, which there's so much. And it's actually interesting. As I was driving here, I was thinking the comment of 30 and single. It's weird when you hear that, because in my heart, in my spirit, I just feel like where I'm supposed to be, in the sense that God has given me a sense of contentment. But it is interesting when you hear that and you're like, oh. And then the voice of the world is like, something's wrong with you. Or you have 80 and 90-year-old grandpas asking you all day, have you gone on a date yet? And fighting for your marriage. And you're like, oh, okay. Is something wrong with me? Because the voice of the world says you should be married by now. And so, honestly, it's of course that desire is so deep within me. And I do believe I will be married and have a family and children. And I'm expectant for that day. But yeah, I'm in the waiting. And so that's been the journey of figuring out, how do I do this? How do I do this well? There's been seasons where I haven't done it as well as others, and learning and just honestly giving myself grace in that process, as it does feel uncharted. And most of my best friends are married or have kids in this season.
Does that make it harder to watch everybody around you in a season that you want to be in?
Yeah, it's interesting. In moments, yes. And then it also gives perspective in other moments where I'm like, oh my gosh,
I don't have curfew.
Totally. Like, don't have a curfew. Can like literally go on a weekend trip when you're asked on a Thursday and have an incredible weekend away. Can just be spontaneous, honestly.
Yeah.
And so it is interesting because comparison sneaks in, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, oh, I could use comparison to give me like godly perspective of the season and be grateful, or it could lead me to disappointment. And so I think it's been a gift, honestly. Like, you're feeling, I'm obsessed with your children and my best friend's babies. It's like, oh, it's so sweet. And some
you're
moments,
like the ultimate aunt.
Thank you.
In her aunt era.
Yeah, loving it. Sometimes I'm like, oh, my children are going to be so loved by so many kids that are older. I'm going to have so many babies, so all the things. So there's moments where I do notice, and I'm highly aware, like sitting at church and I look around the 2 rows on both sides and everyone's with their spouse and their kid. And I, in that moment, my heart feels lonely, and it's like, oh, I wish I wasn't in this position sitting here single.
Yeah.
And then there's days where it just feels like a gift. Honestly, what actually feels harder is having friends going on first dates or being in like a dating season, because for some reason it's like closer to where I'm at and it's like my natural next step.
Right.
And so then when close friends are in that like natural, like closest step to me, that actually feels harder.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it's like, you're 30. Like, that's not old.
Yeah.
But in the Christian world, it is so hysterical how people are like, oh my God, like middle-aged and single. And it's like, give me a break. She's 30 years old. Like, even if you're 60, like, is our God not the one that somehow comes in clutch every time?
Totally.
Like, so you mentioned doing singleness well, and then other times you've done it not well. So walk me through how you've done it well and that you're proud of. And then I'm going to have you walk me through how you haven't done it well. So
yeah, I think, gosh, probably 3 years ago, I was actually trying to think of the timeline of that this week, but
so when you were still middle-aged.
I was like bordering elderly at that point. No, 3-ish years ago, a relationship ended. I think it was in 2021 and in the spring. And that was the first time I had seriously dated someone since giving my life to Jesus. And so when we broke up.
Which, just for the listeners, was about 7 years into your like
walk with the Lord.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And so when we broke up, there was like so much to process, just disappointment and all these things. But I remember I actually heard it on a podcast and I'm like, yes. But they were talking about like, live this season in such a way that you miss it, that you like genuinely grieve the loss of it when you step out of it. And so I just set my mind to that, of like, even on a daily basis, some days were hard where it was like, my sister was walking, literally had a breakup, and then I flew home on a Tuesday or Wednesday single, and then we went ring shopping for my sister on Friday.
That's right, I remember that.
To be engaged.
Yeah.
And just
Salt
talk about like whiplash.
Seriously.
Honestly, the grace of God is so kind, though. I genuinely felt only excitement, and and then I cried on my drive after, but while I was in that moment, I genuinely felt so present and so excited. But just that season of like, also my sister, my best friend and roommate, actually walking into the next season. So it was like kind of a double whammy, but I remember just walking in the foothills and being like, I want to grieve the loss of this. I want to miss this.
Yeah.
And so I think I just looked for opportunities for that. And honestly, after that, I said this, I was reflecting, it kind of became like my yes year, where it was just like an opportunity came and I just said yes.
Yeah.
And that was amazing and so fun and spontaneous. And I've had to say no more now recently for a practical sense. But yeah, just enjoying, like, there's so much time. I remember talking to Riley, and I was talking about these podcasts I was listening to, and he's like, wait, how do you have time to listen to podcasts? I'm like, wait, what do you mean? Like, when I wake up, when I come home, when I drive, like
when I'm walking my dog.
Yeah, like my day's filled with silence. And he's like, you're gonna miss that. And I was like, whoa. Even like something as small as like
So
listening to
true.
podcasts that I enjoy, you know?
Yeah.
So I think doing it well, I mean, that entails so much, but just like pressing in, finding gratitude, having perspective. And then
how on earth, just for someone who's like, Lauren, easy for you to say, like, and they obviously don't know the details, how on earth do you unlock gratitude in the middle of not having what you want?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's super practical. Like, there are days where I'm on a walk, literally last night, and I'm like, I would enjoy this walk if someone were with me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I'm literally just going to start bringing to mind like what I'm thankful for. I'm thankful for the sun to be shining, for it to be spring in Boise. I'm thankful to be going to Florida this week and to be able to be in a position where I can take a week off and not ask my husband if he's okay with me buying the plane ticket. Like all the little things, you know. And honestly, so
you just recognize with your senses what you do have, and then you let your your spirit
and
kind of follow.
It sounds hyper spiritual, but it's true, and it's biblical. Like my emotion really does follow that. And that's not to like say that you don't have your feels. I just wake up abounding in gratitude every day.
Well, I do feel like that is the facade that people have. People are like, oh, like, just be thankful. Oh my gosh, you get to travel. You don't get, and they fill in all these things that you say, but with that sarcastic tone, like, or I should say, it just feels ingenuine, as if it is truly just a snap. And it's hard to get your spirit to align with the good that you do have. You know?
And I think also, I mean, this is like your life's message, but it's like, in everything on this earth, there's the tension of like joy and pain. And to like toe the line of that, like gratitude is a practical tool. But I even like spend time thanking God of like, I don't know, this has just been like so deep in my heart of like, this is unto something. Like, God doesn't walk me through any season of life just to be like, ha, like
wasted.
Like that's just like behind you. And it's just like, oh, that deep conviction of this is unto something. And I have friends who are in waiting seasons, waiting to get pregnant, waiting, so many, waiting for healing, 100%. Waiting for, and I had that revelation too with that breakup 3 years ago of like, I remember flying to San Diego to visit one of my best friends, and the Lord was just speaking to me of like this, like, I'm preparing you. And in all honesty, I'm like, okay, that feels kind of doom and gloom, but there was a sense of like encouragement in it where my spirit actually felt at peace of like, I trust you. And I think that's been the journey of like, I trust you. I trust you. I trust your character. I trust who you are. I trust who you've been to me. That's another key of like looking back and seeing like testimony and like those monument moments where it's like, oh, you showed up for me here and here and here and here and here. And speaking of like, seeing other friends, it's like, oh my gosh, while there is moments of that being hard, it's like you did it for them and I'm your daughter. Surely you'll do it for me.
Totally.
So even when someone gets what you want, it's like, oh, you did it for them.
Yes.
Like, because you're a God that cares.
That is not how people see it. People feel like God has this little allowance of miracles and kindness. And it's like, oh, that one. And not, and I hear it all the time within infertility. It's like, how do you not just obsess in jealousy when the people around you are getting, or my sister, like, honestly, that's the greatest example of how you literally went through a breakup. And then that next season was when Tay was getting married, and you was just like, it's truly, when you look at God's nature of that, he's abounding in
Yeah.
kindness for all of his people.
Yeah.
And even the way that I always think about how Abraham, he was told he would have a son, and then it was 27 years later that he
Yeah.
had Isaac. And I think about the buildup of just excitement. Well, I mean, I guess he wouldn't say excitement, but the buildup, and then he gets it.
Yeah.
And then 14 years later is asked. And I have always thought about with my journey of waiting when it came to infertility and all those things, the buildup of waiting for that thing that you really are hoping for then exposes the idol of, once I get it, is this thing I've been waiting for. Because I mean, gosh, idols in every single season. But once I have it, am I going to death grip this thing that I just love so much? Or am I going to say, okay, Lord, you gave it to me and I'm giving it right back?
Yeah.
And then being able to truly walk out a surrender when you have it, when you don't have it.
Yeah.
Because whether you have it or not doesn't distinguish who he is.
Right.
But, oh my gosh, the level of just trust, like the fruit of trust after
Right.
you do walk in something you've been hoping for so long is like wild.
Yeah. And even the concept of time, I mean, when I think on my 20s, I came to know Jesus when I was 21 as like my savior and Lord of my life. And I honestly had to go through such deep healing of things I was honestly completely unaware of. And so I didn't actually feel like ready to date until I was probably 25 or 26, that my heart actually felt excited about the idea.
Sure.
And so, you know, I'm 30, so that's been 4 to 5 years. 4 to 5 years is such a short
And we're
amount
over
of
here
time.
like, come on, God, do you love me, Lord?
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
literally in the grand scheme of things,
know.
it's like, oh my gosh, I would rather wait another 4, honestly. Like, I can honestly say that of 4 more years to have 60 years of a rich marriage.
Totally.
It's like, gosh, to trade in, it just seems so silly when you zoom out and look at our perspective of time, but it's just the cultural like expectation that you feel like you have to meet like by this age. Or I've even had to lay that down. That was one thing. Tay got married when she was 31, I think. And I'm like, okay, if I start dating someone by March of this year and follow this same timeline, I'll be on the same timeline as Tay, you know?
Oh, that's exhausting.
And, it's exhausting. And just...
it's all real. Everybody does that. So if you're in your car, like shaking your head, you've been doing it too. So
it's just the expectation that we put on it. Cause it's like, oh, it like to our flesh, it puts an expiration date on the waiting and the disappointment, but then it like just actually multiplies it 100%. When you don't get it in that timing. And so that's been a journey of learning to just surrender it all, honestly.
Yeah.
The timing, the person, where he's coming from.
So coming to a place in your walk where it's like, Lord, I love you so much that even if I don't have a husband, even if I don't have any children, even if, you know, when I do have children, it looks different than I thought or whatever. Do I still believe you're who you are? And understanding that his promise is obviously his presence and his closeness, as in Emmanuelness in our day to day, not the thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's been a journey, even more so recently. I actually was processing this with a friend who has struggled with infertility, and I actually was convicted recently, of me using, well, it's not promised, actually as a self-protector.
Oh yeah.
To just be
soften the blow
of not having it, or if it doesn't happen. And I mean, for me personally, like I do believe I will be married wholeheartedly. And that's the tension even of like getting prophetic words and weighing those and weighing timing, and
for sure,
which just people need to use wisdom when giving words about such things. But I think it, like, there are promises in the Bible, and there's not a scripture that says you are promised a husband. God did create marriage, and but
he gives the desires of your heart.
Correct.
That's what's so tricky.
And yes.
And the desire of the heart in that context is him.
Yeah.
But people will use that, right?
Right. So I think, and even like it's his command to be fruitful and multiply, and to do that you need to be married.
Right.
And so it's a tension, and I'm not going to sit here and say I have that mystery figured out, but I think it is like, I think in that, even trying to unpack that, we're like trying to create theology around why not yet.
Yeah.
And I've actually been really challenged in the last year or so to quit asking why and start asking who. Like, who are you, God? And in my life, in my testimony, and in scripture, and like why. Bill Johnson actually says that about healing is like anytime we ask why about healing, why someone wasn't healed, we're going to end up creating a false theology about who God is, because the biblical precedent is that Jesus, everyone was healed.
Yeah.
Like there's not a story where, but that's not the reality we see on earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're in this tension, we're in this in-between space. But yeah, why has never led me to a good answer, honestly. Like it leads me to a belief about myself, that I'm not worthy, that there's something I should do, that I need more healing, that piece of trauma isn't resolved, that, all the why. When you ask why, like the enemy's going to answer that question, or it's going to believe you to doubt God. And so I've just found myself having to ask, like, okay, who are you? And when I meditate on who he is, like the result is
The
fruit.
why is irrelevant.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, the fruit is trust.
Yes.
And it's like, I don't have to understand, but I know who you are, and who you are is good in every single way. And you will provide for me, and you will sustain me, and you will meet my needs, and you will give me a sense of contentment in the waiting. And sometimes that's super spiritual and sometimes it's not. And it requires my partnership to actively practice gratitude, or reach out to friends, or say, I need this, and let someone meet that need. Like we have people for a reason.
Yeah.
And God didn't create us to live in isolation and independence for a reason. And so honestly, like if I could tell anyone how to do it well, like that's a huge key, is like find your people, and even to be so honest when it's hard. Like the text messages you've received, of like, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I'm not tempted, and oh, I'm not
100%.
like I'm a human. And so having people to remind you who you are, who he is, and then also what I've been so just like hooked on in the last month, he's like, you need to have vision.
Yeah.
And if you actually have vision for your marriage, when you think about that guy and then you're like, oh, do you want him to be the father of your daughter? And it's like, oh, actually, I don't know that he's the best option.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And it gives you anticipation for what you do want. When you were talking about your community, that was one of the thoughts that came to my mind, is that's one of the gifts of the community. Yes, all the people around you happen to be married, because that's common, obviously, within Christian culture. Surrounding yourself with such high caliber people that are all of your people's spouses, it's given you vision for the kind of marriage you want, the kind of husband you want. Tell me how you haven't done it well.
Yeah, I think when I haven't done it well, for me personally, it's really easy for me to just isolate and not let people in.
Do you recognize when you're isolating?
Yes.
Are you an extrovert or introvert?
That's up for debate.
Yeah. Okay. Because some introverts would say, I'm not isolating. I just,
Yeah. I definitely need alone time. Definitely on a weekly basis. But I also love being around people. I feel like I'm right in the middle, honestly. But I think thankfully I'm able to recognize that. And I think, like, speaking of doing singleness well, like you have time, like heal, like learn about yourself, learn about what you want, like find some tools relationally. I think it's so silly to like go into the biggest decision of your life and the biggest relational change, be like, oh, I'm just going to wait till then to learn how to do this well. It's like you wouldn't show up to the March Madness championship without practicing. So it's like, why would we? You have time. Like,
and that the waiting is active. It's not passive.
Right. side tangent. But I think that doing that and learning myself and learning how to communicate and learning conflict and practicing that in relationship and friendship and honestly finding my voice. Honestly, the way that friendships healed me and mentorships healed me in that season of not even feeding that with, but God is so good. Like, but it's going to be worth it. It's like, I'm with you. It is so hard. And like, yes, those things about God are true. And it's just not helpful in those moments. And so to actually be myself and not feel ashamed about it.
Totally.
Like to actually feel those intense emotions of disappointment.
So the girl who just is like, oh my gosh, she's swiping right on everything. She's just like, like, how do you not do that? Like,
Yeah.
how do you not take things in your own hands?
Yeah. I think recognizing first that the desire is good.
Okay.
God
good.
placed
just removing
the desire.
shame of.
Yeah. Like God placed the desire to want to be in a relationship, to want to be married, to want to be a family, have a family. Like that's a godly desire. And then it's like, I mean, recently I've dated online and I have zero shame about it. I think that's even a whole nuanced topic in Christian dating, which is hysterical.
Yeah, episode 2.
People have so many opinions about that.
For sure. We'll get there.
And I mean, quick note, I'm thankful for it. I have had amazing dates with amazing godly men and have come out better.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a huge perspective shift for me on any date, whether it's a first date, second date, third date, fourth date, we become boyfriend and girlfriend. Like, how can I actually make that person better on the other side of this? How can I actually heal things? And not to like put that burden on yourself, but it's like, oh, I want to date well so that we're both better on the other side of this. And I feel so strongly about that in my last couple of relationships where it's like, no, I'm a better person. Like that sucks. And I really don't want to go through another breakup.
Yes.
And I hope I don't have to. But if I do, like there was so much learned and that's invaluable for my marriage. And it's like, oh, whoa, that's like the foundation where I've been able to learn these things to actually have so many more tools in my tool belt for marriage. And so I think even like, in terms of expectation, like just let the expectation be, oh, I'm going to be better on the other side of this for whatever amount of time it is. And because I like see that they're a son of God and even for their future wife, like I literally had that thought with my last breakup. I'm like, gosh, I have no control over his decisions after this, what he'll do with his grief, what he'll do with disappointment. Like I can't choose that for him, but I just pray that this is like unto something for his future marriage.
Yeah.
Like, and
there goes your feeler again. Most people are breaking up being like, but here, that's amazing. I think it's such a marker of God's heart. Like,
yeah. And it's just a gift to date someone who's mature and emotionally intelligent and mature. And it's like, oh, the more mature you are, the more you're going to find yourself dating people who are in that same sphere. And it's like to actually be able to walk away honoring one another and hoping the best. Like, yeah, dating well should actually heal more than it hurts. And like, I don't say that there's not disappointment and heartbreak at the end, but I do actually believe that it should be more healing, more preparation, more like you should be able to look back and say, I'm proud of the way I did that.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of the way that I left them.
I want to ask, what about the girl who literally can't get a date, or the guy listening? What about the people that are like, she's talking about going on dates, she's talking about these things, but I'm not even getting in those positions.
Yeah.
Like, how do you do singleness well when you literally, or maybe somebody has a conviction of not online dating and they're in a small, like,
yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I was in that place for the first, like I said, five-ish years. I literally felt so hidden. Yeah, just like really. And I wouldn't say I had full perspective of this then, but looking back, I'm like, whoa, what a gift that God just ushered me into a hidden season. And I was like, and I was working at the hospital and I would have all these patients that are like, you're so beautiful. You're so smart. You have a good career. You make good money. Like, you're like, why are you single?
Yeah, sure.
And which was salt in the wound for sure. But I think I look back and I truly, honestly, thank God for my sister, because she paved the way for me to like just go in the same path of, she just embraced healing. And like, we had a great childhood, and there's, all of us have needs that have not been met by parents, or wounds from being left out of the girls' clique in middle school, or whatever, you name it. Sure. And so like, those placed wounds in our hearts. And so I honestly just deep dived into healing, and I'm like, okay, God, if I'm hidden for a reason. And going back to the start of this conversation, like, I have to choose to trust you.
Yeah.
Like, it's not because something's wrong with me, but it is an opportunity. And I think in any like quiet season, it is just an invitation to press in and be like, okay, I'm not going to try and figure out why, but I think it's so silly when people are like, oh, I joke about this, but I'm like, okay, what's the tension between like, this is a whole nother conversation, like taking things into my own hands and trying to make it happen, positioning myself where a single guy might hang out, as opposed to like, yeah, I'm not naive to the fact that if I literally sit on my couch every single night from work till bedtime, and sure, I'm never around people, that I'm not giving myself much opportunity to meet someone. And I don't think the Lord's going to drop them on my doorstep. But then there has been seasons right now where the Lord's like, there's a conviction to not be online. And that was in January where I felt conviction about that. And honestly, it was probably 3 weeks that I felt convicted and didn't act on it and didn't delete the app. But I knew, but it was like, but God, this is my only way that I feel like I'm actively participating in this happening. And are you really asking me to give up that? And he's like, I don't need you controlling this. And I have many friends who have, that's no statement on online dating. I think in any season, it's like, you have to just be obedient to what the Holy Spirit is convicting you of personally.
100%.
There's seasons to pick it up. There's seasons to lay it down. There's seasons where it's an okay for your best friend and it's not okay for you. And that's where it's been a self-assessment of myself of like, what, like, that's been the biggest check of like, how am I doing? And am I doing this to meet a heart need that's unhealthy? Like, am I feeling really lonely in this moment? There's been nights where it's like on the weekends where everyone's having a family night and I'm really tired, so I don't feel like going and being with single friends. So I am on my couch alone, and I made that choice, and that feels lonely. And I'm like, oh, I could just go on and see who's on there,
Mm-hmm.
see who's, and it's like, oh gosh, that decision's literally being driven by loneliness. And then in other seasons where I've felt really full, and it's like, okay, there is like a permission slip to be on in this moment. And so, yeah, I think doing like a self check-in and being like, what's the motivator for these decisions?
Loneliness is such a loud feeling.
Yeah.
And it causes you to do things that aren't often congruent with who you are, just in the name of like passion, in the name of the dream.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really good point of saying like having that as your like strainer of like, when I'm doing this behavior or when I'm thinking these thoughts, is it rooted from loneliness? Is it rooted from identity? The other thing is, it's like, you touched on this earlier, but just processing like in every single season, like, who are you to me?
Right.
And in every single season, when you're lonely, his answer, because he's so wildly multifaceted, will be different.
Yeah.
Like, there's a different name of God for every different shade of loneliness. And it's like a wild thought. It's a wild, like, and what you learn obviously in seasons of waiting and celebration and all these things, but there's something about the nearness of him when you don't have what you want, unmatched. Like, you truly understand who God is to you.
Yeah.
So I think just learning like every single moment of having a need that God is like, wow, I'm the only one that could satisfy this.
Yeah.
learning the intimacy and the depth of who he is just like wild.
Yeah. A friend recently said, this is just a thought I had when you were talking, like, I can be alone and not be lonely. And I'm like, oh, that's so good. And just even being like, oh, I can be alone. I can go on a walk alone. I can have a Friday night alone. And like, I don't have to feel lonely. I can actually feel like the fullness of joy. I can feel like comfort. I can feel the Lord's presence. I can feel like my primary feeling doesn't have to be loneliness until I get married.
Yeah, I think you're bringing really beautiful language to the lack of fantasy. And I think the way that you've just pressed into truly knowing the Lord, like even people are listening and they're like, Lauren's just talking and sharing her experience with Jesus. So like, but you've developed that type of friendship with the Lord through all of this. At the end of the day, you're building history with the Lord.
Yeah.
You're learning that the season you're in never has to be marked by loneliness, whether you're holding the dream or whether you're not.
Yeah.
And what would you say to someone who has the dream of companionship but is single?
I actually listened to a podcast from an older single woman, on the upper end of middle-aged and in her 60s, and she talked about you know, how many years ago she in her 20s and 30s dreamt about her marriage, and she had these folders filled with wedding ideas and like her dream dress and all these things. And she's like, I threw those out decades ago, and literally I have Pinterest boards like my wedding's planned. But literally, like, the spirit of fear attached when I heard that, and I'm like, oh my gosh, am I gonna have to delete that vision board?
Yeah.
And I like honestly mentally spiraled. And then I was just processing with Tay, and she actually encouraged me. She's like, Lauren, I actually like think you need to like, because I was like, gosh, maybe I need to like quit dreaming about it, because it's just creating fear. And she's like, no, like, dreaming about this is God's idea. And she's like, I actually think you need to hang on to your vision for it. And that kind of like plunged me into, well, this has been like a thing that the Lord's speaking to me about, but scripture that says a people without vision will perish.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, I actually need to hold vision. And that doesn't mean I spend all my time thinking about it. It's like, oh, when temptation comes in the cute boy who I know doesn't love Jesus, like bring myself back to the vision for it. But actually dreaming with him has actually produced hope. It's actually produced deep trust. It's not created disappointment or fear. And so I think I would actually encourage people to actually hold on to that vision and do actively dream with him about it. I think that is beautiful.
Yes.
And
dreaming with Jesus and fantasizing by yourself are two different things.
Very different things.
And I think if you can truly train and discipline your heart to dream with the Lord, it is such a beautiful ticket to learn how to like truly hope and truly like, it is like, it's momentum. It's fuel for you to keep going. It's like, okay, this is like how you actively wait.
Yeah.
Is to dream with the Lord.
Yeah.
But that fantasizing and obsession is where.
Yeah.
Yeah. The last thing I want to touch on is like the concept of like when you are just sold out and you're like, Jesus, like to have everything. You can have absolutely everything. Often the hardest part of praying that like surrender is like the dreams that you don't have.
Yeah.
And it's funny when you're like, yes, Lord, like you can have my heart, you can have my dreams, you can have my family. But for some reason that's like it's like so much harder to sacrifice what you don't have when you're, and be able to come into a place of like true surrender in the Lord and being like, oh, it is like, it's such a fresh fragrance to the Lord when you are able to give him something that you don't have yet.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something you have modeled so beautifully, and you've given multiple times. And I think that's the other thing is like sometimes in seasons of singleness, you have to resurrender. Yeah. Like, you're like, oh, here we are again, you know? And I've seen you resurrender over and over and over and choose just the like, honestly, the face of Jesus over anything else. Yeah. So I think you model singleness beautifully. obviously I've seen you date. I mean, I've always been just amazed at your maturity in dating, all the things. And so honestly, we probably need to do a second episode because my mind is like going of all the things we could talk about.
Totally. I want to add one quick thing because I had this thought of like, in every season we're in, we have an opportunity to learn a face of Jesus. And I was thinking about this actually at our women's ministry night a couple of weeks ago. Someone was like, if you need to know Jesus as bridegroom, if you need to like trust him, like I feel like there's a gift for that to happen tonight. And I was like, whoa, I actually like have such deep revelation of that because I've had to. And it was this moment of like, oh gosh, I like actually trust you so much, like to sometimes a painful amount. And you've revealed yourself to me as bridegroom because I've had a lack of that in the physical reality of my life. And so in every place of lack, there's actually an opportunity to encounter Jesus as that lack. And I've been thinking about that ever since, of like, what a gift, God, that you actually have given me revelation of yourself as bridegroom in my waiting, so that number one, it'll be like so sweet when I like have that in person, but also like the temptation to want to have that need met in my husband will be less just because I've learned you as this.
So good.
And I remember talking with one of my friends who got married younger, and she was like, honestly, it's just so hard not to like roll over in the morning and like go to my husband to meet the needs that I know God needs to meet, which I'm sure will still be a tension, right, of actually walking that out, but to actually have that revelation of him. So to the single, I would just like ask him, reveal yourself to me as bridegroom in this season. And it's like truly such a gift to know him as that, and to be able to access that piece of his heart readily. And the more that you do that, the easier it is to meet him there and in those encounters. And I just like, one of the things I see in my mind so quickly with Jesus, honestly, is like a wedding dance, and like a first dance with me and Jesus, and just like that intimacy. And so, just with that, it's like every place of lack, it really is an opportunity to learn him.
So good. Thank you for just sharing. I know it's like when you're sharing in the middle of something, it's sometimes kind of like, I don't know. I've always felt when people would interview me when I was still walking the road of infertility, I felt like they were like, yay, this is like the poster child of like, the infertile lady.
Totally.
And you're like, everyone, like you just kind of feel so exposed, and it can feel really tender. So I really appreciate you being the single lady, the single middle-aged lady.
People will be like, oh, the most eligible bachelorette. Yeah. And they're like, wait, that's probably hurtful. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I love you.
I love you too.
Oh my goodness, isn't Lauren just such an incredible woman, voice, well of wisdom. I absolutely love this dear friend of mine. Like I said, she's one of my absolute closest friends. And so, I just loved what she said. And so like always, when you leave comments or when you leave a review, or even when you share it on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, whatever it may be, it really does help these podcasts get into more ears, and it's just helpful, right? It's so helpful. And so if you have a minute, it would mean so much if something in this podcast touched you, if you'd be willing to share it. So like always, I know you could be anywhere, so it means so much that you spent the last hour with us, and we will see you on the next episode.